Okay, so now we are going to update our mine endpoint so that it will broadcast the new block that we create to all the other nodes in the network. So let's do that now. So pretty much everything from here up is pretty good. And where we want to start is down here. And what we want to do is we want to broadcast this new block to all the other nodes in the network. So let's do that right now. So we're going to follow the same process that we have done many other times before, which is we're going to loop through all the other nodes inside of our network, and we're just going to make a request to them and send this new block along as data. So to do that, we will say bitcoin.network_nodes.for each network node URL. For each of these network nodes, we are going to make a request and send along the new block. So we're going to need some request options. So we're going to say const request options equals an object. The first option on this object is the URI. And the URI that we want to send this request to will be the network node URL. Plus, we want to send it to a new endpoint that we are going to create that will be called receive new block. And we don't have this endpoint yet, but we are going to create this endpoint in a future video. The next option that we have to add is what method we want to use, and we want to use the post method. Next, we have to send along the data, which will be inside of the body, and we want to send along the new block, which will be equal to the new block that we created. So this new block variable is this new block that we created up here. And finally, we want to set JSON to true. Cool. Now we want to make this request. So we will say RP, which is our request promise library, and we want to pass in our request options. So every time that we make one of these requests, it's going to return a promise to us. So we want to make an array of all these promises. So we will say const request promises equals an empty array. And we simply want to push all of these requests into this array, like we've done many times before with our broadcasting of transactions and our broadcasting of new nodes that are added to the network. It's the same exact process here. So we're simply going to say request promises.push, and we're going to push in each one of these requests. So now at this point, after our for loop has ran, we should have an array that is filled with promises. So now we want to run all of those promises. So we will say promise.all, and we'll pass in our request promises. And then after that is ran, we want to say .then, which takes in a function that takes in data. Cool. So after all of our requests have ran and they have completed, we're going to want to do another calculation in here. One thing that we have to do that we haven't considered yet is that when we create our mining reward transaction, we also have to broadcast this transaction throughout our entire blockchain network, which is not happening right now. Right now, when we mine a new block, we are creating a mining reward transaction, but we're not broadcasting it to the whole network. So we need to change that right now. So we're going to delete this calculation from up here, and we're going to broadcast it after we mine a block. So after we broadcast the new block that has been created, Now this is where we want to create a new mining reward transaction and broadcast it to the whole network. So to do that, we are simply going to send a request to our transaction broadcast endpoint, because we already have all the functionality to broadcast a transaction built out inside of this endpoint. So there's no need to rebuild all of this functionality again. So instead, we're just going to make a call to this endpoint with the mining reward transaction data passed in. Let's do that now. So down here, we're going to make a request. So we need some request options. So we'll say const request options equals an object. The URI that we want to hit will be the current node's URL. So we're going to say bitcoin.current node URL. And then we want to hit the transaction broadcast endpoint, just like that. Cool. The method that we want to use will be post, and the body data that we want to send will be an object. And on this, we need to put the transaction data. So we will put an amount of 12.5 Bitcoin, a sender of the address 00 like we had before, and a recipient that has the address node address, which is this current node's node address from up here. So all of this data that we just used is the same data that we used to create a mining reward transaction before. But now we're just broadcasting it to the whole network. And finally, after the body, we want to set JSON to true. And outside of our request options, we want to send this request. So we will say RP, which is request promise, and we'll pass in the request options. And actually, we want to return that. So we get a promise returned from this request right here. Cool. So at this point, inside of our mine endpoint, we are doing a bunch of calculations to create a new block. Then once we create that new block, we are broadcasting it out to all the other nodes inside of our network. After that broadcast is complete, down here inside of our .then, we are now making a new request to our transaction broadcast endpoint. This request will make a mining reward transaction for us, and it will broadcast it to the entire blockchain network. And then after this request runs, all of our calculations are complete, and we simply want to send back this message right here. So we want to .then one more time, a function that takes in data, and we simply want to move this response up into our .then. That way we know we are only sending a response after all the other calculations take place. When we use this .then, we are saying, run all of these requests, then when they finish, run this calculation right here, and then when that finishes, run this code right here. Cool. And that's it. We can save that, and that is our updated mine endpoint. So one more time, top to bottom, we are simply doing a lot of calculations, including a proof of work, to create a new block. Then we are broadcasting that new block to all of the nodes inside of our network. After that whole entire broadcast is complete, we are then making a request to our transaction broadcast endpoint, and we are sending in the transaction data of our mining reward. So basically, we are broadcasting to the whole network a mining reward transaction that this current node that we're on earned. And then after that broadcast is complete, all of our calculations inside of this endpoint are completed, and we simply send back this response, which has a note that says the new block was mined successfully, and we send along the new block as well. And actually, let's change this text to say new block mined and broadcast successfully, since the new block was broadcast as well. Cool. In the next video, we are going to build out this receive new block endpoint, and then we are going to test these endpoints to make sure that they are working properly. I'll see you in the next video.